The roar of a Gulfstream's engines usually represented wealth, freedom, and unimaginable luxury. For Sloane Whitaker, it became the sound of brutal betrayal. Standing alone on the sun-scorched tarmac, she watched her husband's private jet rise into the sky with his mistress seated comfortably inside. He had abandoned her without money, transportation, or even a working phone. Sloane believed her life had just ended. Then a massive matty black bombardier appeared through the clouds. The heat rising from the pavement at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey was suffocating, but it could not compare to the cold emptiness spreading through Sloane's chest. She looked every inch the wife of a technology billionaire. She wore a perfectly tailored linen Max Mara suit, oversized Tom Ford sunglasses that shielded her eyes from the harsh glare, and one hand rested lightly on the handle of a graphite Hermes Birkin. She had been waiting inside the air-conditioned glass atrium of the signature flight support terminal, watching a sleek white Gulfstream G650ER being fueled and prepared. The tail displayed the proud logo of Whitaker FinTech. The trip was supposed to be a celebration. It was their wedding anniversary, and her husband, Conrad Whitaker, had promised her a romantic escape to Villa d'Este on Lake Como. They desperately needed the time together. As Conrad's company grew into a multi-billion-dollar empire, his presence in their marriage had slowly disappeared. Their life together had been reduced to brief messages, canceled plans, and dinners Sloane ate alone. A black Maybach glided through the security gates, its tires rolling quietly across the pavement before the vehicle stopped beside the Gulfstream's lowered stairs. Sloane's heart lifted with cautious hope. She picked up her boarding bag and walked through the glass doors into the deafening whine of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit. The rear door of the Maybach opened. Conrad stepped out. He looked immaculate in a navy Brioni suit. His silver-streaked hair had been styled perfectly, and a platinum Patek Philippe flashed on his wrist. But he did not look toward the terminal. He did not look at his wife. Instead, Conrad turned back toward the car and extended his hand. A young woman emerged. She had long honey-blonde hair and wore a tightly fitted sundress that seemed wildly inappropriate for international travel. Sloane recognized her immediately. Brielle Hart. She was the executive vice president of public relations. A remarkably inflated title for a woman whose primary responsibility appeared to be organizing Conrad's calendar. Sloane froze. The heat suddenly felt unbearable. Her grip tightened around the handle of her Birkin until her knuckles turned white. Conrad whispered something to Brielle. The younger woman responded with a light, musical laugh before climbing the Gulfstream's stairs and disappearing into the luxurious cabin Sloane had personally designed. Only then did Conrad turn toward his wife. "Conrad," Sloane managed to say. Her voice was barely audible above the shrill mechanical whine surrounding them. "What is happening? Why is she here?" Conrad did not flinch. There was no guilt in his eyes. He looked at Sloane with the cold, detached expression of a chief executive dismissing an employee who had outlived her usefulness. He reached inside his suit jacket and removed a thick manila envelope. Then he pushed it toward her. "I'm sorry to handle it this way, Sloane, but my schedule is crowded and I have no interest in dealing with a scene at the penthouse." His voice was smooth and entirely without warmth. "I filed for divorce, the documents are inside, my attorneys will take care of everything else." Sloane stared at the envelope as though he had handed her a venomous snake. "Divorce?" Her voice shook. "We're supposed to be going to Italy. It's our anniversary. Conrad, please, what are you doing?" "I am going to Italy," he corrected coldly. "With Brielle." His tone sharpened. "We're celebrating the successful closing of the Series D funding and several other developments." He glanced casually at his watch. "I arranged for a vehicle to return you to Manhattan. Remove your personal belongings from the penthouse. Your security access will be revoked." "You cannot do this," Sloane breathed. The reality of what was happening crashed over her like a suffocating wave. "I built this life with you. When you were writing code in that damp Brooklyn apartment and surviving on instant noodles, I paid the rent. I believed in you. I supported you. And you were generously compensated during the marriage," Conrad replied. His upper lip curled into a sneer. "Read the prenuptial agreement, Sloane. The one you signed because you trusted me." He leaned slightly closer. "It is ironclad. You receive a lump sum payment of $2 million, nothing more. Whitaker FinTech belongs to me." Before Sloane could speak again, Conrad turned away. He did not look back as he climbed the aircraft stairs. The heavy cabin door retracted and sealed with a soft, final thud. Sloane remained motionless on the tarmac. The wheel chocks were removed. The enormous Rolls-Royce engines roared to life, releasing a violent blast of hot exhaust that whipped her hair across her face and made her eyes burn. The Gulfstream taxied toward the runway. Then it surged into the sky, shrinking until it became nothing more than a silver point against the clouds. Sloane was alone. Humiliated, she turned toward the terminal. Wesley Porter, the kind-faced terminal manager who had welcomed her warmly when she arrived, stood near the glass doors. He stared down at the floor, pretending not to have witnessed what had happened so she could retain some fragile illusion of privacy. Numbly, Sloane lowered herself into one of the plush leather chairs in the private lounge. She reached into her handbag with trembling fingers and removed her phone. She tried to call her sister. The call failed. Sloane frowned and examined the screen. The signal was strong. She tried again. The call failed a second time. A terrible realization began forming in her mind. She opened her banking application. A red banner appeared across the screen. Account suspended. Please contact Chase Private Client. Her breath caught. She opened the American Express application. Account closed. Conrad had not merely abandoned her. While Sloane had been waiting for him inside the terminal, he had systematically destroyed her access to every financial resource she possessed. High had disconnected her cellular plan, frozen the joint bank accounts, and canceled her credit cards. There was an unactivated emergency phone at home, but at that moment, Sloane had $32 in cash and a handbag worth millions that she could neither eat nor use to reach Manhattan. The cruelty was absolute. Leaving her for a younger woman had not been enough. Conrad wanted to break her completely. High wanted her frightened, isolated, and too poor to challenge him in court. Sloane buried her face in her hands. The tears she had been fighting finally came. She remained in the silent, heavily air-conditioned lounge for a long while. Wesley brought her a glass of sparkling water with lemon and placed it quietly on the table beside her. He said nothing. The ice slowly melted untouched. Sloane forced herself to think. She needed to return to Manhattan. She could sell her jewelry. Her engagement ring alone, a flawless 8-carat emerald-cut diamond, would provide enough money to hire a vicious legal team. But even the simplest decisions felt impossible. Planning her next move felt like attempting to climb a mountain without oxygen. Then a deep, resonant rumble vibrated through the floor beneath her feet. It sounded completely different from the sharp scream of Conrad's Gulfstream. Sloane raised her head and looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows. A massive aircraft descended from the gray sky. It was a Bombardier Global 7500, one of the largest and longest-range private aircraft ever built. But its size was not what demanded attention. The entire jet had been painted in a stealthy matte black that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. There were no bright corporate colors or decorative stripes. The only marking was a subtle charcoal tail number. Instead of taxiing toward a distant section of the airfield, the enormous aircraft rolled directly toward the private terminal. It turned with aggressive precision until its nose pointed almost directly toward the lounge windows. The engine slowly wound down. A sleek staircase unfolded from the fuselage and lowered onto the tarmac. Two men in dark suits emerged first. They surveyed the area with the focused movements of professional security personnel. Then a third man stepped into view. High was tall and moved with an athletic, predatory grace. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit without a tie. The upper buttons of his crisp white shirt were open. Even from inside the terminal, Sloane could see the hard angles of his jaw and the intense, calculating purpose in every step. High did not walk toward the main exit. He entered the terminal and headed directly toward the private lounge where Sloane was seated. The glass doors opened. The stranger walked inside without acknowledging the front desk. Wesley began to step forward, but one of the security men gave him a subtle shake of the head. The manager wisely moved aside. The man approached Sloane. Up close, his eyes were an icy blue filled with an intelligence sharp enough to feel unsettling. "Sloane Whitaker," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that commanded the room without effort. It was not a question. It was a statement. Sloane straightened in her chair and quickly wiped a tear from her cheek. Her instincts immediately became defensive. "Do I know you?" "We have never been formally introduced," he replied, sliding his hands into his trouser pockets. "My name is Declan Rowe." Sloane's breath caught. Everyone in New York's financial industry knew Declan Rowe. High was the founder and chief executive of Rowe Capital, a notoriously aggressive private equity firm known for orchestrating hostile takeovers and dismantling underperforming technology companies. High was considered a shark. More importantly, he was Conrad's most hated rival. Conrad had spent years accusing Rowe Capital of attempting to undermine Whitaker Fintech's stock. "Mr. Rowe," Sloane said, forcing herself to remain composed, "if you are looking for my husband, you missed him." She glanced toward the runway. "High is on his way to Italy with his new head of public relations." "I know," Declan replied without emotion. "I monitored his flight plan." He studied her carefully. "I also know that Conrad initiated a complete freeze on your personal assets, revoked your access to the Whitaker Foundation, and suspended your cellular service." Sloane's face tightened. "Which means," Declan continued, "you are currently stranded at Teterboro without money, a functioning phone, or any way to return home." Anger rose through Sloane's embarrassment. "Are you having me followed?" She looked directly into his eyes. "Or did you come here to celebrate the collapse of Conrad's personal life?" "Neither." Declan pulled a leather chair closer and sat opposite her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as his gaze locked onto hers. "I came here for you, Sloane." She frowned. "For me?" Confusion overwhelmed her. "I have nothing to do with Whitaker Fintech's daily operations. If you are looking for corporate secrets, you are wasting your time." Her voice hardened with bitterness. "I am only the wife he discarded. That is exactly what Conrad believes." A dangerous smile touched the corners of Declan's mouth. "Conrad is a brilliant programmer, but he has always been careless with legal documentation, particularly the paperwork he completed when he was still a desperate young developer in Brooklyn searching for seed funding." Declan reached inside his suit jacket and removed a slim black leather folder. He placed it on the glass table between them and opened it. Inside was a heavily redacted legal document. One signature at the bottom made Sloane's heart stop. It belonged to her father. Your late father, Everett Monroe, was an electrical engineer, Declan said quietly. Yes, Sloane whispered. She could not take her eyes away from the signature. He died shortly before Conrad and I were married. He had nothing left. He died bankrupt. He died bankrupt because he spent everything he possessed filing a patent for a predictive algorithmic processing model, Declan corrected. A model he created. Sloane looked up. A model he allowed his future son-in-law to borrow so Conrad could build a prototype. Declan tapped the document. But Everett never transferred the intellectual property rights to Conrad. Sloane stared at him in disbelief. My forensic accountants and attorneys have been examining old corporate archives, Declan continued. Conrad's empire, the proprietary trading platform, and the Series D funding he is celebrating are all built on a stolen foundation. He pushed the folder closer to her. The algorithm belongs to your father's estate. The room seemed to tilt around Sloane. Her thoughts spun violently. And I am his only heir, she whispered. Exactly. Declan leaned back. Conrad believes he abandoned a liability on the runway. His expression sharpened. He has no idea that he just walked away from the rightful owner of 70% of his company's core architecture. Sloane's lips parted. With this document, you can take his patents, his company, and his billions away from him. Sloane looked from the evidence to Declan's icy blue eyes. Why are you showing this to me? Her voice was cautious. You do not perform acts of charity, Mr. Rowe. What do you want? I want Whitaker Fintech, he answered bluntly. I intend to dismantle it and absorb its market share into my portfolio. There was no apology in his voice. I have attempted to purchase the company, but Conrad's ego will never permit him to sell. Declan continued calmly. If the lawful owner of the intellectual property files a major lawsuit and forces the company's operations to stop, the board will panic. The stock price will collapse. His eyes remained fixed on hers. I acquire the controlling shares for a fraction of their former value. He paused. In exchange, I ensure that you leave with $1 billion fortune of your own, completely independent of that pathetic prenuptial agreement. Declan stood, towering over her and blocking the bright glare from the tarmac windows. You have two choices, Sloane. His voice softened. You can take the car Conrad arranged, return to a penthouse you can no longer enter, and fight his expensive lawyers for whatever scraps they decide to offer while he drinks champagne beside Lake Como. He gestured toward the enormous black aircraft outside. Or you can board my jet. Sloane followed his gaze. We fly to London. We meet with some of the most aggressive corporate litigators in Europe, and we burn Conrad's empire to the ground. Sloane looked at the manila envelope containing her divorce papers. It lay abandoned on the chair beside her. She remembered Conrad's sneer. She remembered Brielle's delicate laugh. She remembered the neglect, the manipulation, and the unimaginable cruelty of leaving her stranded without a single usable dollar. Sloane picked up her Birkin. I have always preferred London to Lake Como, she said. For the first time, her voice did not tremble. Declan's predatory smile widened into something that looked almost like genuine respect. Right this way, Mrs. Whitaker. Sloane followed him out of the freezing lounge and into the suffocating heat of the tarmac. As she climbed the Bombardier stairs, she did not look back toward the empty space where Conrad's Gulfstream had been. The engines of the matte black aircraft roared to life, shaking the ground beneath them. But Sloane was no longer frightened. She was ready for war. The interior of Declan Rowe's Bombardier Global 7500 was a masterpiece of understated authority. There was none of the gaudy gold plating or mirrored decoration Conrad preferred. Instead, the cabin was wrapped in charcoal Loro Piana cashmere, matte walnut paneling, and brushed titanium. As the aircraft climbed high above the clouds, leaving the humid air of New Jersey behind, Sloane felt the adrenaline begin to drain from her body. She sat in a wide leather club chair with a plush blanket around her shoulders and a crystal tumbler of aged Macallan in her hand. Declan's flight attendant had brought it without being asked. Across the aisle, Declan had already returned to work. Several glowing screens connected to a portable Bloomberg terminal displayed endless streams of financial information. Conrad is celebrating, Declan said without looking away from the fluctuating charts. He posted a photograph from the terrace of Villa d'Este. Declan glanced toward Sloane. Champagne, the new public relations director, and a caption announcing Whitaker Fintech's Series D closing at a $3 billion valuation. Sloane closed her eyes. She could imagine the photograph perfectly. High is arrogant, she said. He has always believed he was the most intelligent person in every room. Her fingers tightened around the glass. When my father died, Conrad emptied his apartment. He must have found the original notebooks and hidden them. He did, Declan confirmed. He finally turned toward her. But he did not destroy them. A man like Conrad would never destroy the source of his success. His ego would force him to preserve it as a trophy. Declan explained that his investigators had traced the physical notebooks to a private vault in Geneva registered under a shell corporation. But we do not require the original notebooks, he added. The digital evidence is already there. He pushed a sleek tablet across the table. The screen displayed a dense block of letters, numbers, and programming code. My forensic engineers recovered this from a public patent filing. Conrad submitted while seeking an earlier round of financing, Declan explained. Look at the sequencing in the 12th line. Sloane leaned forward. She was not a software engineer, but she had spent countless hours watching her father write algorithms by hand at their kitchen table. Everett had possessed a distinctive habit, a mathematical signature. I used the Fibonacci sequence, Sloane breathed. Her finger moved across the screen. My father was obsessed with the golden ratio. He embedded it into the central processing loop of everything he designed because he believed it optimized the flow of information. She looked up. Conrad used to call it a meaningless mathematical vanity. And yet he was too lazy to rewrite the foundational architecture, Declan replied. A shark-like smile crossed his face. He built a multi-billion-dollar financial technology empire using an architecture he never truly understood and a signature he openly mocked. Declan closed the screen. We will meet with senior partners at Clifford Chance in London. They will file emergency injunctions in the United Kingdom and in the Delaware Court of Chancery. Their aircraft landed at Farnborough Airport as light spread across the English countryside. Two armored Range Rovers waited beside the runway. Sloane soon found herself inside a glass-walled conference room overlooking Canary Wharf, surrounded by some of Europe's most ruthless intellectual property attorneys. The legal team worked relentlessly. Sloane barely rested. She provided every detail she could remember about her father's work, Conrad's early development schedule, and the claims he had made regarding the invention of the algorithm. The evidence formed a devastating timeline. Conrad had filed the preliminary patents almost immediately after Everett Monroe's funeral. The trap was ready. All they had to do was close it. When the financial markets opened, the world awoke to a seismic shock. The Financial Times published an exclusive digital headline. Whitaker Fintech halted as intellectual property lawsuit threatens $3 billion valuation. Declan's legal team filed the injunctions. A federal judge in Delaware reviewed the evidence showing the stolen Fibonacci architecture and the forged transfer documents investigators had uncovered. The judge ordered an immediate freeze on Whitaker Fintech's proprietary operations until an emergency hearing could be held. Inside a penthouse suite at Claridge's Hotel, Sloane stood beside the window and watched rain fall across London. A secure phone Declan had provided vibrated on the marble table. The caller identification displayed a familiar number. Conrad, Sloane answered. She said nothing. Sloane, what the hell is happening? Conrad's polished voice had disappeared. He sounded breathless and unstable. My attorneys say you filed an injunction. Have you completely lost your mind? You are destroying the company. I am reclaiming my father's property, Sloane replied. Her voice was glacially calm. You destroyed the company when you built it on stolen ground. You have nothing, Conrad shouted. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. You cannot do this. His breathing was harsh through the phone. I will bury you in litigation. I will make sure you never receive a single dollar. Look at the stock price, Conrad, Sloane said evenly. The Series D investors have withdrawn. The board has scheduled an emergency vote of no confidence. She allowed a brief pause. You no longer possess enough capital to bury anyone. A shrill voice sounded in the background. It was Brielle. Conrad, my card was declined at Prada. What is going on? A cold smile appeared on Sloane's face. Enjoy your anniversary, Conrad. She ended the call and tossed the phone onto the sofa. Declan entered the room carrying 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to her. His eyes shone with triumphant respect. The board contacted my firm, he said. They are terrified. He raised his glass. They want to settle before the Securities and Exchange Commission begins a criminal fraud investigation into Conrad. Sloane took a sip. What are your terms? Not my terms, Declan corrected softly. Yours. The atmosphere inside Whitaker Fintech's Manhattan boardroom became suffocating. The long mahogany table was surrounded by furious venture capitalists, sweating directors, and a wall of anxious corporate attorneys. At the far end sat Conrad. He appeared to have aged dramatically. The glow from Italy had faded into a sickly pallor. His Brioni suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were red from exhaustion. The heavy boardroom doors swung open. The room fell silent. Sloane entered. She was no longer the broken woman who had cried alone on the Teterboro tarmac. She wore a razor-sharp Alexander McQueen suit in deep crimson. Her posture was flawless. Her gaze was merciless. Declan walked behind her, radiating the calm and terrifying authority of an apex predator circling wounded prey. They took the 2 empty chairs directly opposite Conrad. Sloane, Conrad hissed. He slammed both hands against the table. You have no right to be here. This is a closed board meeting. Actually, Conrad, she has every right, Declan replied. He tossed a thick leather-bound dossier onto the center of the table. As the verified sole heir to the Everett Monroe estate, Sloane owns the foundational intellectual property supporting your entire platform. His voice remained calm. Without her algorithm, your trading software is nothing more than an extremely expensive screensaver. The lead investor, Preston Hale, cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Rowe, Mrs. Whitaker, we would prefer to avoid a prolonged legal dispute. He glanced around the room. The press is already destroying us. What are your demands? Sloane looked directly at Conrad. She wanted him to see that there was no mercy left in her eyes. The terms are non-negotiable, she said. Her voice carried clearly through the silent room. First, Conrad resigns immediately as chief executive. He forfeits every severance payment and stock option because of gross misconduct and intellectual property fraud. Conrad's face turned dark red. You greedy... Be quiet, Conrad, Preston Hale snapped, glaring at the disgraced founder. He turned back toward Sloane. Continue, Mrs. Whitaker. Second, Sloane said, leaning forward. I will sell the exclusive licensing rights to the Monroe algorithm to Roe Capital. The board members remained completely still. In exchange, Roe Capital will acquire Whitaker FinTech for 40 cents on the dollar, assuming control of every asset and liability. Panicked glances passed around the table. It was a hostile takeover executed from the inside. The investors would lose a substantial portion of their money. But if they challenged Sloane in court, the company could be liquidated, leaving them with nothing. Declan had trapped them perfectly. And your personal compensation for the licensing rights? Preston asked tightly. $1.2 billion, Declan answered for her. The funds will be placed inside a trust controlled exclusively by Mrs. Whitaker, beyond the reach of any marital agreement or prenuptial claim. Conrad released a hollow, manic laugh. You believe you can walk in here and steal my company? He struck his chest with one hand. I built this, me. You built the walls, Conrad, Sloane replied softly. The quietness of her voice cut through his hysteria. But my father laid the foundation. She held his gaze. And you abandoned his daughter on a runway with $32. Sloane stood and smoothed the front of her crimson jacket. Sign the transition documents immediately. Her expression remained cold. If you refuse, I will instruct my attorneys to pursue criminal fraud charges against Conrad, and I will dissolve the company. She did not wait for an answer. Sloane turned and walked out of the boardroom. Her heels struck the hardwood floor in a steady rhythm. Declan followed her. They entered the private elevator as the doors closed behind them, shutting out the explosion of shouting that erupted inside the boardroom. Sloane released a long, unsteady breath. The crushing burden she had carried, the manipulation, betrayal, emotional neglect, and financial control, was finally gone. Declan pressed the button for the lobby. Then he looked at her. His expression held professional admiration and something deeper. You executed that perfectly. I had an excellent mentor, Sloane replied. A genuine smile appeared on her face. So, Declan said as the elevator descended, slipping his hands into his pockets. You are about to become one of the wealthiest women in New York. His eyes held hers. What will you do first? Sloane remembered the cold loneliness of the Teterboro tarmac. She remembered the burning jet exhaust against her skin and the unbearable feeling of complete helplessness. She looked at the glowing numbers above the elevator doors. I think I am going to buy my own jet, she said. Her smile widened. And it is going to be matte black. Betrayal is a bitter form of currency. But in the ruthless worlds of high finance and corporate law, leverage is the ultimate equalizer. Sloane's transformation from a discarded wife into a billion-dollar power player proved that revenge is most effective when it is served cold, supported by overwhelming legal evidence, and executed with absolute precision. Behind every stolen empire lies a fatal weakness. And true power belongs to the person holding the blueprint capable of tearing it all down.